There's no getting around the fact that Arianna Huffington is a celebrity, a media celebrity. So it's important to establish right off the bat that she's the very antithesis of being famous for being famous. Moreover, and unlike many of the individuals we know as celebrities, she's a person of truly remarkable substance. Substance formed during her Athens childhood, honed at Cambridge University, and then employed to change the world in politics, public affairs, writing and publishing, and most recently, big business. I admire Arianna Huffington enormously, not least for her continuous invention and reinvention of herself, a very Sarah Lawrence trait, as we've heard and as we know, that makes her vital to so many conversations across the spectrum of American public life. Indeed, although she didn't attend Sarah Lawrence, when we met, she told me how much she admires the college and its graduates and parents, a number of whom she counts among her closest friends. Incidentally, we were introduced at the Huffington Post office, a bustling bullpen of bloggers and journalists, all of whom look like they're under 30, including Arianna herself. But what's just as important as Arianna Huffington's current role is how she got there and what's behind the invention and reinvention that has marked her brilliant career. At 16, she departed her native country and language for Cambridge University, where she earned her debating chops as a member of the prestigious Cambridge Union. It wasn't long before she became its third female president, an especially remarkable feat when one considers the Union has been around since 1815. Thanks to these accomplishments, as well as with an MA in economics under her belt, the British media quickly discovered Arianna. She became a regular guest on BBC radio and TV programs, while also writing the first of her now 13 books, then establishing foundational roles for herself as both media commentator and author. In 1980, she moved to New York. In 1986, she met and married Michael Huffington. They had 2 daughters, and she became involved in conservative politics through supporting her husband's candidacy for the US Senate, by writing articles for National Review and other fora, and through championing Newt Gingrich's Republican Revolution. Many of you are aware that Arianna Huffington's politics began to slowly change course around 1996. But perhaps the most interesting phenomenon is that her core beliefs have seemingly remained remarkably consistent, whether she was supporting conservative candidates or organizing buses for people wishing to attend Jon Stewart's and Stephen Colbert's rally to restore sanity and/or fear in Washington. Those core beliefs clearly include the importance of social activism, an aversion to inequality, and a belief that morality should play a role in politics and government. In 2003, Arianna ran against Arnold Schwarzenegger for governor of California. That bid was obviously unsuccessful, and many are probably regretting that vote. But what came next was hugely and brilliantly successful. In 2005, Arianna Huffington founded the Huffington Post, which by its very form bypassed the traditional gatekeepers of news and media commentary. Today, the Huffington Post is one of the most heavily visited, most influential, and most cited media vehicles in the US. It is also one of the few to do well financially. The Huffington Post was recently acquired by AOL, a deal which saw Arianna appointed president and editor-in-chief of all of AOL's news operations and media enterprises. So clearly, engagement and commitment and enormous reserves of energy define Arianna Huffington. And when added to her deep intelligence, quick wit, and insightful commentary, this leads to one extraordinarily talented and formidable woman. To the unfortunate individuals who find themselves the targets of that intelligence and wit, the Latin phrase, cave donatos et dona ferentes, may certainly apply. beware of Greeks bearing gifts. For the rest of us, we welcome them with open arms. Graduates, families, friends, and Sarah Lawrence community, I'm honored and really personally delighted to present our 2011 commencement speaker, Arianna Huffington.
Thank you so much, President Lawrence, and thank you so much for inviting me to share this glorious moment in your lives, graduating class of 2011. I know it's not the most important thing. I know it doesn't matter as much as everything else, but you look amazing. This is a really magical place. I was here for dinner last night, and I met an alum who had been here in college and had graduated together with her mother. I love that. She's now a trustee. I met another trustee who is the second man in his family to graduate from Sarah Lawrence. His father was part of the GI Bill. And then I met a graduate who told me she was going to Paris and had already written her memoir. How very Sarah Lawrence. You are very lucky to have President Lawrence as your president. I love the fact that you have a James Joyce scholar as your president, because it's a little known fact, but when I was considering launching the Huffington Post in 2005, I first thought I was going to call it Huffington's Wake. And it was going to be full of puns and allusions to Greek mythology, and there was going to be a blog by Leopold Bloom and another by Stephen Dedalus, and nobody was actually going to read it, but everybody was going to pretend to have read it, and declare it fabulous. So you made it. Congratulations. And if you look at the world that you're about to inherit, it's a split-screen world. On one side of the screen, we see a kind of explosion of irrationality, of darkness. We see a world in which the president of the IMF is accused of rape, and the former governor of California has fathered a child with his housekeeper. Incidentally, and as an aside, why is it that women leaders are never accused of rape? It's also a world in which 70% of people in this country think we're on the wrong track, in which 25 million people are unemployed or underemployed, and in which, for the first time, total outstanding student loan debt will be higher than total credit card debt, over $1 trillion. And the percentage of young adults moving back with mom and dad is 34%. So clearly, if you combine all that with the fact that we have senators and presidential candidates who don't believe in evolution, who think global warming is a myth, and in which they basically think that they don't just have a right to their own set of ideas, but their own set of facts, this is really a strange world you're walking out on. But on the other side of the split screen is the world you are creating. And while the media are obsessing over Donald Trump's presidential run or Kim Kardashian's latest boyfriend, your generation is busy creating another world. On this part of the split screen, there is an explosion of creativity, innovation, empathy, and compassion. You are the most connected and engaged generation in history. And to quote this great sage, Will.i.am, we used to consume news and information sitting on the couch, and now we are consuming it galloping on a horse. We don't just consume it, we share it, we pass it on, we add to it. We are part of this connected world that we are, at the very moment that we are absorbing it, transforming. And you are still asking the big questions and contemplating the cosmic riddles about why we're here and what life is really about. And please don't stop contemplating these cosmic riddles when you get busy earning a living. I wrote a book about that in the 1990s. It's a book that didn't do well, so don't worry if you haven't heard about it. It was called The Fourth Instinct. And in that book, I explored the instinct that takes us beyond the first three of survival, sex, and power. The instinct that drives us to want to find meaning in life, the instinct that drives us to transcendence, the instinct that drives us to community. And Dean Lawrence mentioned the Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert rally. In a moment of irrational exuberance on the Jon Stewart show, I offered to provide bus rides for anybody who wanted to go to Washington. I didn't realize there would be 10,000 people and 200 buses, and we all left from Citi Field in New York. And when I was there at 5 in the morning welcoming everyone to the buses, I discovered there were people who had flown from around the country to get on the bus to go to Washington. And one of them said to me, I just came from Washington to get on the bus to go to Washington. And I thought to myself, this was obviously a kind of moment of insanity in the pursuit of sanity, but at the same time, it was a moment of illustrating our longing for community, because getting on the bus together was a pilgrimage. And in a sense, your generation is on this pilgrimage to transform a world that desperately needs transforming. And the key to all this is empathy. There's nothing that our world needs more than empathy if we are going to survive and flourish in the 21st century. And just before he died, Jonas Salk said to me, we are in a time of transition. Of course, every generation thinks they're in a time of transition. I'm sure Adam turned to Eve in the Garden of Eden and said, darling, we're in a time of transition. But some generations actually are in a time of transition, and you are moving from what Jonas Salk called Epoch A, based on survival, competition, to Epoch B, based on meaning and collaboration. And it's a huge, huge seismic shift that's happening right under our eyes. And the key to it is actually part of your school motto, wisdom with understanding. I love that motto, because wherever you look in the world, what we are missing more than anything is not intelligence, but wisdom. We have incredibly brilliant leaders with very high IQs running business, media, politics, making terrible decisions every day. I have a feeling sometimes, for example, that if Lehman Brothers was Lehman Brothers and Sisters, it might still be around today. Because after all, leadership is about seeing the icebergs before they hit the Titanic. And Dean Lawrence spoke about transformational knowledge, where there was a philosopher, I'm sure you've all heard of him here at Sarah Lawrence, who before even Twitter existed, in the 3rd century, a philosopher named Plotinus described 3 different sources of knowledge: opinion, science, and illumination. And in the internet age, we are drowning in opinion, and we are drowning in data, which is another form of science, but we are desperate for wisdom. And that's really what we need from you more than anything. And for me, one of the most important things about wisdom is to recognize that often the purpose of our life is not obvious as our life is unfolding. Things, especially the biggest heartbreaks, and I have 2 daughters, one of whom will be a senior next year, so I'm always trying to protect them from the biggest heartbreaks. But let me tell you that as you're experiencing it, and you will because we all do, the most important thing to remember is that there is a purpose to them. It may not be obvious at the time you're experiencing it, but there is a purpose to them. Let me tell you about one of my heartbreaks. I fell in love with a man when I was 22, who was twice my age and half my size. Love is blind. I actually fell in love with him before I met him. Has that ever happened to you? He was a brilliant writer, writing for the London Times. His name was Bernard Levin. I used to cut his columns and actually put them between pressed flowers in books. And then I met him one night, and I was completely tongue-tied and idiotic. And nevertheless, he invited me to dinner a week later. And of course, I spent the entire week prepping for dinner. And no, not going to the hairdresser or anything trivial like that, but reading everything he had written about Northern Ireland and the Soviet Union. I wanted to be really, really smart at dinner. Of course, he never asked me about Northern Ireland, the Soviet Union. And I ended up spending 7 years of my life with him. And then I was 30, and I desperately wanted to have kids, and he wanted to have cats. So I did something that I was at the time terrified to do. I left him. I left this man I was very much in love with, and because I didn't trust myself to leave him and stay in London, I left him and moved to New York. So the rest of my life, my children, my books, the Huffington Post, the fact that I'm standing here speaking to you on your commencement day would not have happened if this man had married me. So my whole life happened because a man refused to marry me. So remember that, okay? In life, the things that go wrong are often the very things that lead to other things going right. Or as Max Fisher, who is graduating today and whom I met last night, told me last night, you know, he said, sometimes you are bumped from a class you really want to go to. Like he said, I was bumped from an art history class, but I ended up in a class that taught me so much about the Enlightenment. And it turned out that, and I quote Max here, by getting unlucky, I actually got lucky. So that seemed right perfect after my Bernard Levin story, so thank you, Max. A key component of wisdom is also fearlessness, which is not the absence of fear, but not letting our fears get in the way. I remember one of the low points in my life was when my second book was rejected by 37 publishers. Now, by about rejection 25, you might have thought, I might have said, you know what? There's something wrong here. Maybe I should be looking at a different career. Instead, I remember walking down St. James's Street in London really depressed and seeing Barclays Bank there. So I walked in, and with a lot of chutzpah and just about nothing else, I asked the manager for a loan. And for some reason, he gave it to me. And that's what made it possible for me to keep things together for another 13 rejections until my book was finally published. I still send the manager, Ian Bell, a Christmas card, and I think of him as a helpful animal in a fairy tale. You know how... So remember, throughout your life, there will be helpful animals disguised as... disguised as human beings who are going to be there to help the hero or the heroine of the story to get out of the dark forest. Remember to send them Christmas cards. Because very often the difference between success and failure is just perseverance. It's getting one more time, it's getting up one more time, then you fall down. And the thing that my mother taught me more than anything is that failure is not the opposite of success. It's just a stepping stone to success. And that means not... That means not letting the fears in our heads, the doubts in our heads, that I call the obnoxious roommate living in my head, get in the way of our dreams. I was recently on Stephen Colbert's show, and I told him, Stephen, my obnoxious roommate sounds exactly like you. And he said he had to find a place to crash. And one of the things I love about Sarah Lawrence is your old tradition, when it was a women-only college, of productive leisure. Because I feel that as we're living in a more hyper-connected world, we need desperately to learn how to unplug and recharge. And I work with many great engineers producing great killer apps every day. I think what we need, and maybe one of you here will create it, is a GPS for the soul. We need a killer app that will help us be very clear in real time when we need to course correct, when we need to unplug and recharge and connect again with ourselves, which is, of course, the ultimate connection. And you know what? I'm going to say something which may seem kind of trivial for a commencement speech. But the most important thing here, the simplest key to daily wisdom, daily unplugging and recharging is sleep. Sleep and Sarah Lawrencean productive leisure are keys to tapping into our wisdom. And for some reason, men, I'm sure not Sarah Lawrence men, who are much wiser, somehow have equated sleep deprivation with virility. So you guys here, men and women, need to change that. Because I was recently having dinner with a man who bragged that he had only gotten 4 hours sleep the night before. And I didn't say it, but I thought it. You know what? If you had gotten 5, this dinner would have been a lot more interesting. And the final key to wisdom that I want to mention today is the wisdom that comes when we're doing something for others. And I know that all of you here at Sarah Lawrence seem to have already discovered it, because I know that you are working in so many different ways to help others, whether it's the Early Childhood Center here, the right to, which is called ECC, just to know I'm hip to that. The Right to Write prison program, I love that. The art exhibition in the Yonkers Public Library, doing theater outreach in public schools, working on affordable housing with the homeless, etc., etc. Please don't stop doing these things. It's really what gives our life meaning, what strengthens our community, what helps us tap into our wisdom. And I'd love you to then write about your experiences to inspire others. Just write. Just send them to me, Arianna@HuffingtonPost.com, and we'll post them on the Huffington Post. And you know what? Marketers have realized there is something in the zeitgeist around doing good, and they're tapping into that collective wisdom. Have you seen the explosion of cause marketing? Even Shiva's whiskey now is advertising itself on TV by pointing out millions of people, the ad says, are out only for themselves. Can this really be the only way? And that's an ad for Shiva's whiskey. You know, there is something happening when they're using our appeal to collective goodness to sell scotch. So let me just end by saying that this moment in history quite simply demands that we stop waiting on others, especially others living in Washington, to solve the problems and right the wrongs of our times. So as you are leaving this magical place, please don't wait for leaders on a white horse to save us. Look in the mirror and discover the leader in the mirror. Tap into your own leadership potential, because the world desperately needs you. And that means daring to take risks and daring to fail as many times as it takes along the way to success, and more important, to remaking the world. And to do it all with more boldness, with more joy, with more sleep, and with more gratitude. Congratulations, and thank you so much.